The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor Thomas Goss, bringing you the 13th collection out of 16 in our series of evaluations of entries for the 2021 Orchestration Challenge from website subscribers. And what a great way to start with this very, very cool arrangement. I mean, just it's so it's so understated. I love that. It's not making the point too much, right? And I have some suggestions that I think will work really, really well. So, like, the first thing that I'm going to talk about here is the harp. All right? And I hope people aren't getting sick of me talking about it, because I really love talking. I mean, like, I love helping people improve with a particularly annoying instrument. So right in here, I think this is a copy paste error, possibly. Just like you have the pedal layout twice. All right. Okay, so the funny thing is that even though you have fairly active scoring right in here, that you would think possibly would drown out the harp really does have a chance of being heard here, and the harp has a chance of being heard here, especially if you increase the scope of what it's doing. Do you know what I mean? So let's say that you were to throw in, we've got the, here you've got G natural, and then we also have A sharp. So if you were to throw in, G sharp. So actually, you know what? This is kind of annoying me slightly, so I'm going to change it to transposing. Okay, yeah, so A sharp, as I would have thought in the clarinet part. So what if you were to throw in A flat, G, and of course the B on top, and then E, right? And then just had that 4-note chord in both hands rolled and rolled, right? If you had that rum, 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 and then when you got here, instead of going, just playing this, what if you did a quick downward swoop, like a quick downward glissando? Yump, 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 zoom. Yump, up, bum, bum. Do you know what I mean? And blump, 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 yump, da, da, da. Then I think that would come through really beautifully. Now, no need to wait forte here. Forte from the beginning, fortissimo from the beginning, right? Because then the harp will come through over all of these instruments. Mezzo forte from the beginning, and the harp has much less of a chance of being heard here because of the brightness, the brightness of the colors, the accented notes, and everything else. And then right in here, like, just keep it strong, ba 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 da 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 da. Like, you just to keep the syncopation in here, but do not increase the volume of the other instruments, right? Then here you're going to getting louder, right? So I would say forte here, fortissimo there, right? That will keep the balance in there. And yeah, like I said before, quick rolled chords make the chords bigger, and maybe quick down swoop here instead of this, these intervals, I think would be in order. And then you can really hear the harp. And then right in here, this ba 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 ba. I think that's nicely supported by clarinets and violas. All right. And then this glissando here, you don't need this at all. But I see what you're trying to do. It's like you just have this big up swoop in octaves, and you want to sort of show where the C comes in. What you could do is you could have just a single note here, a single quarter note, and then a glissando to the C here, and then this other C coming in, and then both of them glissandoing up to here, right? Then I think that it'll come through. But here's the problem: is you're telling the harpist to glissando in octaves, and you're having that is the left hand obviously has to cover the lower part, but then it has to play this, right? So these notes here have got to be scored in the left hand staff. So this needs to come in here. This part needs to be written in there. But you don't need that. You don't need any of these written out notes. You just need a glissando line. So here, like the pedal marking is absolutely needed right in this place. And actually, the diagram works just as well as the alphabetic notes. So I would say quarter note, glissando line to here, and then the C note, and here in a half note, glissando line to this E. So just keep it all in this staff. And then the same thing, a C note here, half note value, glissando line to here. And then I think that covers all the bases. And you should not write this all out, because it looks like you're telling the harpist to play a scale. I mean, obviously it's a glissando, but it's a lot of notes. It's a lot of stuff to look at. A couple glissando lines just takes care of everything. Now, when you get to this place right in here, I think you just forget the harp, because the tutti scoring is just so big here. The harp doesn't have much of a chance. And just one last little thing, a little note about scoring. Don't put buzz rolls on your timpani, right? Because a buzz roll is when you drop you sort of loosely drop the beater onto the membrane of the drum, and then it kind of has a bounce, and you bounce back and forth. That's the buzz roll, right? So that wouldn't be happening on timpani. Just put in the standard, like have the stems go the standard direction, and have them with the triple beam for the tremolo. All right? Okay. So now, let's talk about the evaluation criteria. So, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, you really do kind of stick to that. But, when you come in here, you're getting a little lower, and then you've got this F down here. So I think that you add just enough variation here. You could have had a little pluck right in here, like on the downbeats of these two bars, maybe. So, I mean, there are ways of just making slight changes, right? This stuff right in here, I think this whole part for your bassoons could be scored in tenor clef, and it would be way more readable, right? Just look at that. See, that's totally something any bassoonist could read. Not a problem. Okay. And I mean, this is technically a tenor register part for your cellos, but you don't have to change that. It's fine the way it is. Okay, so back to the scoring. So, maybe a couple slight alterations to just add a tiny bit more variety, but I mean, it's really kind of cool the way that you have it. I'm hesitant to tell you to change anything, because I think you've worked everything out very logically, and as we've already spoken of, the way that you could make the harp even more emboldened and stronger and capable of dealing with this, because there's no timpani, there are no horns to absorb the sound of the harps. You could score the harp up to fortissimo and have a bigger roll, and roll, R-O-L-L. You could have a harp roll on each of these chords, making them bigger chords and so on, and then make a sort of a sudden swoop down right here. And then it all comes through beautifully, and it almost feels guitar-like. So the problem of the thematic material being repetitive, I think, is not as big of an issue, right? Just because of the uniqueness of it and because of the role of the harp. So, having said that, there is a bit of a problem right in here, and I'll talk about that. This is like the first video, or this is the first evaluation in this video. So, what does this mean here? Accent on a tied grace note, right? So you have to think about that. I mean, in the piano score, there was a chord that was basically, it was a B octave, and then there was a B and an E grace note, and the top note was tied, and the bottom note was sort of slurring down, right, which we've got right in here. Okay, so what he was telling the pianist is to use their index finger and their pinky finger to play the B and the E, right, and then to hit the lower B very hard with their thumb. The problem with this, with transcribing that approach like right onto the piano, right, is that it kind of doesn't make sense. You have a tie and an accent. So do you mean I mean, it just doesn't really kind of make any functional sense. And the other thing is, like, you're asking your flute family players to come in early on a note that they're tying, right? And that just messes up everybody's timing, So, do you want right? Or do you want it to be Or do you want to be da-da, 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 da-da? In which case you should get rid of the ties, right? So think about that. Think about why things are scored the way they are. So the accent on the B octave was for the thumb to hit hard on this note here, right? It was not for the top note to be repeated in an accent. All right, so I would just say, fix that. Get rid of the grace notes is what I would do. Because you've already got enough of that kind of sweeping motion, the yump, 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 yump thing, and you could get rid of it here too. But you've got the grace note kind of motion happening in these parts. So, but the only thing I think that's missing is the sense of G sharp, the little grace note from sounding F double sharp up to G sharp, right? So that's not on the strings. So that might be something that you might want to introduce some way. For instance, this part right here could easily be played by the violas, and then you could do, it's sort of a kind of a transcription of this, right, for the seconds. But, other than that, it's nice and solid, right? And I feel that I love the restraint of it, right? That it's not forceful. Now, if the harp is balanced, according to what I said before, you could even be bringing back, dropping the volume here. You don't have to have an accented staccato at the beginning here. This could be slightly down, like piano, all of a sudden, and then pushing, right? And then you get even more of a roll for the harp. But this just brings us to our new set of criteria, which is the melodic development soaring quite high. I think this is nicely done in the piccolo, the little compromises in the lower line, and then the bottom line being consistent and so on. I think that all works really, really great the way you've got it scored. And of course the piccolo taking the top line. And then right in here, so here's a problem, is that both of your top instruments and your flute family instruments and your violins are just dropping at the same time, right? So maybe the answer to the problem here is not to start off with the piccolo so high. Maybe the piccolo could start an octave lower, and then it can keep its line straight, going straight all the way up to this high E. And then you could like separate when these instruments drop, because the drop is going, da 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 da. It's really going to be audible to the audience. They're not going to feel that consistent rise from this A sharp all the way up to the E, right? They're just going to feel the big slump in the middle, right? So have them change pitches at different times. Was my recommendation. Okay, now there's a big problem here, is that you're running all the way up to the high E, and you're staying up there, at least with a piccolo. So you're making it seem as if this is the beginning of the phrase, but it isn't. It's the end of the previous phrase. And then in the piano version, what happens is it drops an octave. Right? So does the piccolo need to play this high over the top? Right? Couldn't it go? And then the other instruments as a reaction to it, right? There is this little thing, this little criterion in my list. Upper middle register continues on relentless if no textural contrast to previous passage. Well, you do have a textural contrast in here, introduced in, like you have this massive brass in here, the change of functions in your lower strings and everything else. Okay, one of the problems here is that I feel that the harmony of the left hand is not being realized enough, right? So the lower line is coming in very, very, very strong. This line down here, right? And it's really kind of the same, F, E, D, F, D, and so on, E, D, F, D, and then the same thing in there. And we're not really hearing like the upper part of the harmony as much, right? We're hearing a few elements, but they are nowhere near as strong as the bass. So it just really comes off as the bass sort of dominating everything right in here, and it sort of distracts from the but I would say just see if you can rethink this a little bit. So you're ending the phrase, and then you're starting on the second beat. 2, 3, 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and then here it overlaps. And this is all really nicely done. I really love the idea of putting the flute together with the staccato strings and so on. The problem that you're going to face though is like the clarinets are much stronger going into the Shalamil register than the flute is going into its lower register. Like by the time it gets, unless everything were very soft, like if this were very soft scoring, if this started off piano and it stayed piano and went softer or whatever, it would be fine. But since it's mezzo forte, the strings are going to be so powerful right in here compared to the flute that the flute, might as well just stop playing. You'll barely hear it at all. It might be better for this to be an oboe line, or for the oboe to take over from B right here, or maybe from this D, right? Just maybe dun, and then have the oboe coming da 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 dum, that would probably be a stronger option. And remember, in the piano part, there's a crescendo here, right? And then I put in a dashed diminuendo, which is what pianists do because they're setting up the next section. Would this lead to something, transition smoothly to a passage that is workable? I think so, right? So that's my next criterion. Excuse me. It's driving me nuts. The lack of justification after I changed the transposition. So yeah, I mean it's a very solid score. It really holds together. So I would say like the harp right here is not going to be heard. Think about the adjustments that I mentioned before to make the harp more audible and so on. And yeah, I mean it's a really strong piece of scoring, and yeah, just a really great start to this particular collection, which is going to have a bunch of different stuff in it that is real exciting. And this was the point in the challenge phase of this when I had the call and people were starting to send in their entries, when it was really kind of getting close to the deadline, and I was looking at just like one score after another and thinking, are we going to pass last year's record? And we ended up passing it again. And, we went from 90 to 94 of these website entries, and then from 50 to 71 of the Patreon entries. Just so much fun, and looking at this score and just thinking, wow, yeah, I cannot wait to evaluate that. And then the scores that came right after it, which you'll see in a minute. So I will stop blabbing about it and just show you in the next entry coming right up with just one last thank you to Jorge, just for a really imaginative, very fun start to this entire process for this video. All right, Kai. Now that is some full-blooded, gutsy scoring. Hang on, I'm just going to take out the that line right in there, the playback line. Okay, so there's a ton of stuff to discuss in here. If you've been watching some of the other group evaluations, these other collections of website evaluations, then you probably are expecting what I'm about to say about the harp. Now, it doesn't mean that the harp is necessarily unusable or anything. It's just there's some imbalance here. It's really strange. You've got the harp scored at mezzo piano against mezzo forte pizzicato in the strings, and continuing fortissimo in your English horn and E flat clarinet, right? So, and what's more, under that you've got mezzo forte tuba. So how is anybody going to hear the harp at mezzo piano? What you have to think is the harp is one of the most underpowered instruments in the entire orchestra. In order for it to even begin to be heard in this, it would have to be scored at, say, forte or molto forte or fortissimo, right? And on top of all that, you have the problem that pizzicato absorbs the sound of the plucking. Like here you have note for note doubling in a lot of ways of some of these pitches. You've got the E here doubling right there, and you sort of have offset some other pitches, but then the B is the same here, these two Bs. So look, I mean, the message here is that in order for the harp to have a role, it really has to kind of stand alone, and everybody else has to shut up, right? That's it has to not compete with instruments that sound like it. Like, for instance, harp and xylophone, guess who wins? It's always the xylophone, because the xylophone's attack is so much more powerful than the plucking sound of the harp, right? And also just in general, the sound of the xylophone also absorbs some of the upper pitches in the harp. And then you also have horns playing at the same time. Horns absorb the sound of the harp, and loud clarinets absorb the sound of the harp. So you just have to really be careful when you are throwing harp into this. You can score it triple F all you like, but it will still only be about mezzo forte compared to everybody else, right? Okay, a few other things. Like right in here, if you continue to score at mezzo forte for the harp, that would actually be beautiful, right? Along with the celesta, keep them up louder, right? And then make sure that these winds come down to pianissimo almost right away, just within the first couple of beats. In fact, you have forte here, and then I would just say subito pianissimo from maybe the second note or something. This is weird. These are offset right in here. I don't understand why. I'm just going to check something out for a second here. Hang on. All right, yeah. So over here, I see that you've offset the notes. I don't know why. Maybe there was a problem with the grace note or something. I don't get it. Anyway, not necessary. And just, yeah, always have your notes line up if you can. Okay. Yeah, and celesta is just as soft as the harp, right? And hard to hear. So keep these up mezzo forte at least, if not more. If you're going to go diminuendo, it could even be forte at the beginning. Forte for them, right? And then and then like the keeping this pizzicato, pianissimo, and these other winds and stuff. Just try it out with your mock-up, and I think you'll hear that the harp comes through really beautifully, and so does the celesta with that kind of a balance. But yeah, really back off on your winds way before. Like here, you're already going to pianissimo with your bassoons. Why not everybody else, right? Bring everybody down. Okay. So I would say that like the harp scoring right in here is going to get swallowed. This is going to get buried by the force of the downbeat here. The this running up here, right, will get overwhelmed by the xylophone. And it's also just a question, how much xylophone how much xylophone can you put into a piece, right? How much, because it like always dominates, right? It, especially, scoring at fortissimo a lot, or triple F right in here, right? Really, really loud. It's really going to just the mock-up is not telling us enough information here. It will be so much louder than everybody else. Playing these high pitches, it's just really going to ring out. So maybe you could rein in the xylophone a little bit. Maybe you could do this run up here but not play the rest. Or maybe just like it could run up to here and then drop out and then play one of these little 3-beat phrases and then drop out again and then come back in again. Maybe, you could just moderate how much xylophone is in it. Because xylophone tends to, it just sort of makes everything about it, right? It's almost as if it's saying like, it's like that, it's like when you are sitting in the hospital nursing like you're sitting there in traction, and your friend comes over and tells you all their problems and like how horribly they're doing. That's like the xylophone, right? So it really tends to do that. Now, I'm looking at a couple of other things here. I'm going to just zoom in here. All right, so it's a little unclear in here. Like, yeah, so I'm not sure what this means. So do you mean ba-dum, 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 ba-dum with the trombones? Because like this interval is slurred to this. So this is perfect for the second, like the lower voice, right? The lower part of this first voice. But the upper part of this first voice interval doesn't quite make sense, right? And one of the problems here, and we've got the same problem here, except there's no accent or anything. It's just tied to this, ba ba ba. I mean, see, the problem is that like the loudest main note in this piece, being B, is coming slightly before the beat. And nobody has any notion of how this was adapted from a piano score. Like right here, you're sort of replicating to a degree what happened with, part of the hand coming in and then slamming down on the thumb, right? But that doesn't mean that this B up here can be just tied, right? Like a grace note that's tied. So I think you might need to rethink that approach right in there. Now, the rest of it's fine, though. Okay. So, now, let's talk about the evaluation criteria, which I've got sort of memorized. I've been talking about them so much. Excuse me. I just came back from a walk, and it's kind of smoky out there. My neighbor is burning garbage in their incinerator. They're not garbage like weeds and branches and stuff from her recent cleanup of her backyard. So, yeah, so let's talk about those criteria. There is no issue the with restricting the range of your pitches to the upper middle register of the piano transcribed onto the orchestra. That's not an issue. If anything, like just the massive scope is maintained throughout. Although, like, I really love the way you cut things way back in here. I think that's really great, just like in terms of the dynamics. I do have to say this bass drum stroke right in here is going to be so loud, and it's just really going to kill the just the you know. I just I feel like you're taking away the build, right? I think you were trying to underline this this forte piano here, just kind of give it a little energy, give it a little shove. But I think it's just way too shovey, right? A fortissimo accent. What was it that Samuel Adler said in his orchestration class? Like, if you mark fortissimo stroke for the bass drum, it doesn't matter. Like, the rest of the orchestra can just go home for that one note, right? Nobody's going to be able to hear them. That's not quite true, but it is. The bass drum really is a powerful instrument, and you're really giving it a lot of strokes in here. You probably could knock all of this down to forte and cut the accents, and you would still get a lot of emphasis. All right. So the next concern in our list of criteria is is this 4-bar section and this 4-bar section being orchestrated exactly the same way? And if they are, is that something that it just will feel too repetitive with time, right? Now, what's cool about the first 4 bars here is that you change the approach, right? So it's not exactly the same for the first 2 bars as it is for the second 2 bars. So it really is kind of almost like a reaction. And so since this changes to that, and then it changes to that again, then I think that is a little bit of an out. But I will say one thing. You are just really screeching with that. You're pushing your trumpets all the way up there. This is a little strange here. Okay, yeah, so 3 trumpets in C. Yeah, and you're going all the way up to you're giving us a high C and so on in the first trumpet. Yeah, wow. So, there are more elegant ways to score this. I would say have the lower 2 pitches in second voice and the upper pitch in first voice, and then you don't need to put this one thing in here. You can just have the rests for the second voice, right? All right, and then A2, like which 2, right? Like when you have 3 voices, you have to tell us which 2 players, right? So you just say 1, 2, right? Or 2, 3. All right. So let's just talk a little bit about the scoring of those bits in there. I feel it's like I said before, it's really full-blooded. It's really energetic. There's a little bit of a concern here. I like the way you have simile, right? So notice people who have been throwing in these down bows, right? I would say score out a full group, right? So if you want it to be all down bows up to here, and then this to be up bow, then score all that out exactly that way, and then you put the simile right here, right? So, just however that would work according to your imagination. Now, the problem here is that you have the wrong articulation mark for this style of bowing, and you also are throwing in a grace note, right? So, bum, 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 bum. Here you want non-divisi octaves, right? So, I mean, it's totally possible to get that, but is it possible to get that with a series of long down bows, right? So, because the articulation for this should be tenuto, right, rather than an accent or an accented staccato. So, accented staccato has that's more a kind of thing where the bow goes back and forth, right? Or even is like all up bows, right? So for that real springy sound. But here you sort of scored down bows for a springy sound. That doesn't quite work, right? So I would say just get rid of the accented staccato and score like all tenuto marks here if you really want that to be altalone, all down bows. Now, that still is not quite, like the whole altalone sound is like a zooming kind of a sound. Zoom, zoom, zoom. So does a grace note work in there? A zoom, a zoom, a zoom, a zoom. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? Right? Or zoom, 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 zoom. Right? Is that, I don't know. I've seen that now, and with the grace notes, I'm just not sure that I like it. Do you know what I mean? I don't feel I would score that myself. Then here you've got Bartok pizzicato. That's kind of cool. All right, and you've got whip marked as an X note head. Okay, it's completely unnecessary to have X note heads of any kind unless you have like a drum kit sort of notation, or there's some special technique like side stick or some other kind of thing that you want to put into a snare part. But in terms of like the whip is just an instrument like anything else, like triangle, bass drum, and so on, right? So if those instruments can get a regular old note head, so can a whip, right? Don't make things complicated. Just like you want it as readable as possible. But it's kind of cool, like starting with a whip stroke just right at the beginning. It really reminds me of the Ravel Piano Concerto in G. Right? And then, look, you throw in a triple forte on a whip sound right here. That is it's just like the bass drum, a fortissimo bass drum and a whip right in here. Forget about the harp, right? Forget about everybody else. Even the xylophone will have a hard time competing with that, no matter what the mock-up is telling you. All right, so just, you're really pushing that first trumpet high. It's going to be very, very stressed sounding. It's playable, but it's just, I mean, you know what I would do? I would try to just, like, I try to be merciful to the trumpet player and, like, keep him up there, right? So make these pitches, make them for the second and third, and then right in here, like, I would even just say, like, figure out some other way to score this, and just leave the first trumpet player out here, like A3, right? Just have the second and third play. You don't really need the strength, right? And just have like the first play this E and then come back in on the E. Just kind of keep it high, just to keep there, because like those high Cs, they just really, really cause a lot of tension in the lip, and the lip needs some time to calm down, right? So you're kind of, they've just played this scorching stuff. They have a few bars to recover, and then they've got to play this low F in here, right? So it's not that it's not playable. It's just really kind of a hassle. Tires some trumpeters out, and I mean, a young trumpet player, good lip, no problem. They'll be laughing at me out there in the comments, right? But like an older player who is like looking at retirement and is possibly struggling with focal dystonia and other kinds of things, but otherwise it's just a fantastic trumpet player. Just try to think about those players, all right? Because like they still have a lot of life left in them, and they can really handle this stuff, but just watch out on those high Cs. Okay, so the rest of it, I mean, it's kind of cool. I like the way this is scored. Let's move to the other criteria, and that is the melody really soaring up to to stratospheric heights, and the accompaniment figures being realized across a kind of a broader range. And here I feel you do that well. I think that whatever is happening here in the harp, figure out some way of spreading it across both of these instruments so that you're covering all of those pitches, and just cut the harp, because they cannot compete. Like, each one of these plucks is on a single string, right? Each one of these plucks is on 16 strings, right? 16 here, 14 there, 12 there, 10 there, maybe 12, right? So it's just there's so much more power in, and here you said you're telling us which part you are emphasizing, valuing more than what other one, right? You feel that the harp is not as important as the pizzicato. So look, just cut the harp, right? And just let them sort of get themselves into position, get ready, think ahead to this part right in here, which I feel is kind of the only part that will really come through audibly. Like if you did a big glissando here, that would be audible. If you did like a massive rolled chord on some of these other pitches, that would be audible. If you did some figuration over the top of this, right in here, that would be audible. If everybody was really kept back, you cut this down to, say, mezzo forte, and the harp was scored at fortissimo and it was playing something over the top of everything. That would be audible. But the way you scored it now, doubling parts that are strong, not audible. Okay, so right in here, this is kind of strange. I mean, why bother I mean, I think you just leave the piccolo out, right? It's just a question of how much high piccolo can you throw in here before the ear kind of gets tired of it, before running up to this high E is just no big deal, because we've already heard all these high pitches. We've heard F and G, right? So what's the big deal about running up to this high E? Why is that so exciting? Who cares, right? So I think you're giving the game away too much with really high piccolo scoring all the way through here. So what I'd say is just really cut this back. If you must put in, dun 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 dun, then fine, just once, right? And then just get rid of this, and then have the piccolo come in exactly how you have it here, dun 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 dun, and then maybe you can throw in those B's, and bum, and then cut this part right in here, or drop it an octave, right? So that you can come bum. Then we hear that the power of this high E, but we haven't given it away yet in previous scoring. It's just, it just tends to wear out the ear, and then right in here, we're kind of losing the sense of descending if you jump up, right? So dun 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 dun. Yeah, I'm just like, aren't we going downhill now, right? So, yeah, it just really is keeping things. You're keeping the top of the melody really elevated throughout, right? And we're losing some of the nice curves built into the way the melody ascends and descends here and in here. But otherwise, like just dealing with the way that the melody is scored, I think is really lovely. The way you have the clarinets come in here, the oboes, and this octave right in here, the piccolo dovetailing into the E flat clarinet part. I think that's a beautiful trade-off right in there. And then right in here, it's really kind of massive scoring. Like I said, get rid of this, and then the only problem here is that why are, like, first place, why is the second flute playing this right in here? Just because the C is right next to the B is no reason to give like the main part to the support player, right? Ideally, the second player is just as good as the first, but you can't count on that all the time. And you also can't count on the, like say in a community orchestra, you can't, or maybe a regional orchestra, you can't count on the second player having as much time to practice as the first either, right? And some people really like the demarcation of their roles, right? The second player supporting. And if they're stuck, they're sort of thrust out there into the spotlight a lot, sometimes it can be a little annoying or uncomfortable. So this is the first part, right? So it should go to the first player. And then right in here, you've scored your second player in a place where nobody can hear them, right? Like you can score at fortissimo all you like, and score these parts down to forte, but it doesn't matter. This forte line right in here in the second violins is enough to completely bury a fortissimo flute playing these lower pitches. Once you get to E, F, G, so on, the flute starts to come out and get louder, right? And I like the way that this line dovetails into this. But here, I think this could become A2 here, right? And thicken up very nicely there. And then the thing to watch out for is is everything kind of starting lower down at the same time, right? So, yeah, I mean, like you're coming in at the top of this trombone line, so it's not that big of a deal. But just in general, like having parts just all of a sudden all start together when you're trying to create the illusion that we're all rushing upwards and it's just one line going up, then, be careful about just really, all of a sudden all three trumpets are coming in. Like, you have this beautiful arc right in here, but what people are going to hear is the massive fat sound of these trumpets right in here. So to watch out. And then right in here, you have so much weight in your winds and brass and xylophone, and like almost none in your strings, right? So like this will sound very band like, and the second violins will, they're kind of out there on their own. If you're going to put this line here in the second violins, you should put in a line an octave higher in the first violins. And I wouldn't rule out the violas and cellos doubling this sort of middle line right in here, played by the first trombone, right? I think that would make it really exciting, rushing up to this E. Okay, so yeah. Right, and I see like you're trying to avoid having to throw in like an incredibly high E here, and you could like maybe at around A drop down, and then play lower pitches running up to this lower E. Okay, that's all fine. All right. I've already sort of made some comments about this already. In the evaluation criteria, there is a concern about this becoming too relentless if it's kind of scored the same way as before. I would say it does still have that, like, even though this is somewhat different from the scoring, you can see these big gaps right in here, which is great. Still, the build up to this using so much brass, the brass doesn't come as any surprise then, right? It just really comes on as this big surge. And you're also, like, the thrust of it with so many notes, like, kind of continuing on from the downbeat, makes it almost feel like, or makes it very much feel like the phrase starts here rather than here of the next part, right? So it really should start on the second beat, and this should finish up on the first beat. One, and then the next phrase starts, or the next motive starts. Bum bum bum. 2 3 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1, 2 and 3 and 1. So I think if there's some way of delineating this a little bit more, right? Maybe this doesn't have to be such a massive tutti on the downbeat. I don't know. Maybe it can just end up like the completion of the line can be what this is about on the downbeat, and then everybody can come in really strong on the second beat, right, rather than the first. One last little comment, and that is your timpani is really, really active in here. And it is going to end up, even though you're trying to hold it back with some mezzo piano here and there. Look, if you've got pizzicato in your double basses, and you have this kind of a texture, and the tuba and so on, what do you need timpani in there for? Playing the bass line, right? Timpani is not a bass instrument, necessarily. So I think you can just leave the timpani out here, leave it out here. Maybe cut back on some of the, it's almost in danger of becoming a cliche. Not, and I don't mean that in a pejorative way, like I'm starting a fight about it, but the, rolling into something, right? If you do something more than 3 times, you have to ask yourself, in one screen like this, you have to ask yourself, is the audience going to get used to it and just start to expect it after a while, right? So just watch out is what I'm saying. Like, will the ear just start to expect it? And the thing is, you sort of built it into these little 2-bar phrases already, right? and then we have another big one here, a roll, and then a forte piano, and another roll to fortissimo. So maybe that could be cut back on a little bit, right? Maybe just really save it up. Sure, leave these ones in, and then just kind of cut back the roll of the timpani, and then just have it roll into this E if you need it, right? Or just leave all of that out and just have these rolls right in here. So maybe just a little trimming back is in order right in there. Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more that I could pick apart from this and just make it a massive, massive lesson. But I think I've said enough about this score. I think you can take it from there, Kai. I mean, it's just a really, really fun score. And despite the fact that I'm really picking things apart and saying, have you thought of this? And does that work? And so on and so forth. And, the harp is not loud enough and probably can't be in this passage. It doesn't mean that I think that your scoring is bad or anything. It's just, I'm trying to give you as much help as I possibly can in 20 minutes, and your score deserves it because you put a lot of work into this, and it sounds fantastic on the mock-up, and I think it would sound pretty damn good on the stage, but just like tidy some things up and think about some of the proportions, right? And then I think you have a score that just really, really sizzles, right? As much as it does in the mock-up. So awesome work. Now, on to the next entry. All right, Tim, I was just about to take a break and maybe go eat a little bit of dinner. And then I remembered this entry and took a quick look at it, and I just had to make a few comments. So the first thing I want to comment on is, even though Tim is not using the most sophisticated sound set right here, and Tim, you should look into Note Performer because your ideas really deserve it. Even though that's not being used here, I think that it's still a really great score. And it has some powerful ideas, and I think there's a lot that I can help you with in here, and I'm real excited to take a look at it. So like the first thing I'm going to comment on is the use of the harp right in here. I would say anything that you can do in terms of the support right in here with the harp, like it's a really beautiful open texture, right? So I would score the pizzicato down an octave, like maybe have this played by the viola rather than the first violin, because anytime you double pitches on the harp that are being played on, at the same time as pizzicato, the pizzicato overwhelms the sound of the harp. So, but scoring the pizzicato down an octave doesn't get in the way of the harp as you've scored it here. So I would say like just lower, like pick a lower instrument, right? Like, for instance, right in here, the pizzicato being played by the cello will completely overwhelm this note right in here. So if you dropped your cello down an octave and you dropped this down to the viola part, then I think you would have a beautiful, just a really beautifully realized accompaniment figure. And the same thing right in here. Just take things down a bit. And pizzicato, there's no need for pizzicato to be half note in this particular section. There's like the sustain that you're going to get from this, and the viola anyway is not going to be very long, and the cello, it's sort of negligible too, right? It works great though in the harp. So, and the last thing is, if this is all being played piano, then the harp should be mezzo forte, right? That will be the balance, because harp is one of the softest instruments. So don't be afraid to mark the dynamics up by a couple of degrees. And then right in here, you have this. So, this, it's possible for harp to play a role here, but it has to be bigger, right? It has to, like, you could have big rolled chords. You could have octaves on this, blum, 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 blum. and then a big rolled chord right there, and then just maybe octaves in both hands on some of this, or big chords in both hands on some of this, and then it'll come through. And once again, mezzo forte to the piano of the other elements. I mean, you're marking this piano, but you're importing the accents, right? So what's going on here, right? So is it really, you want the accented piano, right? So think about that. Like it's you have really brought down the volume of things. Do accents still make sense, right? Okay. So those are my prefatory remarks on harp. And just a couple of other notation comments. There's absolutely zero need in a concert score for X note heads. Now, perhaps you needed to score them as X note heads in order to activate the tambourine sound in your sound set. But yeah, it's just, in general, you don't really need that. I'm not sure about secco. I mean, what is secco on a tambourine? Because there's kind of no way to stop the jangles from, there's no way to damp the jangles. They're just going to jangle, right? So I'm not sure how much secco makes sense. Okay, now here you've got these big G's, right? And I wonder why there is G here. And I'm wondering if these were supposed to be E's, but you forgot about the bass clef? I don't know. It doesn't quite make sense that is being underlined when you're underlining E with other pitches, right? So maybe this was supposed to be E right in here. But one way or another, it's fine to score that. It's okay. I'm wondering though whether you could hold off on the timpani till right here. Do you know what I mean? So you've got this pizzicato, you got everything coming in here. Boom, dun dun dun, ya da da da, boom, dun dun dun, ya da da da, and then soft, ya ba 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 ba, da 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 da, ba 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 bum, pow. Right, just really slamming it on the bass drum, cymbal, and timpani. Boom, dun dun dun, ya da da da, boom, da 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 da. Right, and then there's more differentiation between these two parts, and that is the next of my criteria. Right, is how much does it help or hurt a piece to have two identical 4-bar sections, right? Now, I'm completely aware of the fact that you are adding a little bit more in terms of your lower heavy brass, and that's cool. But I'm thinking could there be more things about this? Maybe like a bigger plucked chord across, just like a big, almost like a big harp chord, but done pizzicato in all of your strings. If there's something you could do here to just really underline that downbeat with more flavor, more color, right? Now, as to the scoring of everything, it's nicely done. I mean, I like the fact that you're not throwing away your second flute on low scoring that will be invisible, right? You're giving those lower notes to the second oboe and the second clarinet right in here, and you've got you got a punch right here at the beginning on your C trumpets, but they're not getting in the way otherwise of what's going on with your winds. So it's fairly nicely proportioned. I think that if this were played on Note Performer, people would probably be, just opening their eyes and saying, wow, you got so much out of so little, right? And I'm actually looking at the score and just reading it and hearing it in my head. I've got the best sound set of all. I've got the players of my favorite orchestra, or the players from different ones of my favorite orchestras. I've got some NZSO players in there, and I got the horn section from San Francisco Symphony, and and I've got the winds from Concertgebouw Amsterdam, and just like a lot of my little petty favorites. Okay, so I feel that this works really great. I think that's really fantastic, Tim. So now going on to the next part, once again, soft, right? In the, you've got this little piccolo line and oboe line, and the piccolo and oboe work together so well. It's just so nicely done. There's absolutely zero reason for your piccolo to skip the curve, easily, the piccolo can easily go up to D. There's no need for it to jump down and join the oboe right here. You can just go yup, up, 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 up. Go ahead and go for it. That high D is no problem at all. And it will just work better with the way that the melody is scored in the oboe. All right, so yeah, and then you've got this coming in again, and then I feel this is beautiful. Just the way that this is written, soft, and this part just a sudden, suddenly playing soft, and what's cool about this? All right, so just another perspective from your orchestration coach, and that is the timbre here, the texture, the accompaniment is also soft and is also laid back, that you can hear that beautiful folk quality of the piccolo in its middle range, right? So from B, right, like normally between B and G, these would be a bit on the weaker side. However, since it's, since like we've got everything way back in the sound picture, it's all totally possible. And since there isn't a huge amount of weight on this oboe part here, then these pizzicato scales can be heard very, very easily. It's a little strange, though. You go pluck, 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 up to this F, and then you drop down to F in the cellos. So that will, I guess you're having this taken over by the trumpet. So I guess that makes sense. But I would add a little support here, staccato bassoons as well on this. And, starting from piano, crescendo to, you have to tell us where you're going here. Forte, right? Crescendo, piano, crescendo to forte. I mean, how often does that happen? It should happen more. Piano, crescendo to forte. You're going somewhere, right? You're going from soft to loud. You're crossing between the two domains. All right. Now, this is all really fun right in here. And once again, I feel that with a really decent sound set, the first clarinet working together with the flutes in here, and then the second clarinet down in the area of the lower oboes. That's just such a great idea. And then, bass clarinet, a little touch of bass clarinet, and bassoons right in there. And, once again, as I said before, just a more active harp part in here would work really great. If you did this in octaves across the harp and then had like big gushing chords and so on, then maybe, big octaves and intervals and things like that. Try not to have try to have parts that roll more, okay? Rather than just playing like a non-arpeggiando kind of chord, because that's what gets absorbed into the sound of everything else. Even though you're keeping this back, right? This is marked piano. I'd say lose the accents. So piano, even though you've got that scoring, it's still, it still is a lot of texture for the harp to compete with. So you need a bigger handed scoring, more parts happening here in the harp, but you don't want it to be pianistic, right? Octaves, like say octaves, this F C, F sharp C, G, and so on. That's perfect. Each hand playing this in different octaves, and then like a big rolled chord here, and then maybe like C octaves, and then D octaves, and like a big chord here, and so on. Just trying to keep the harp really present and big, right? And I think that all works really, really great with this. And then this is lovely, right? And you are not letting the flutes get too low, right? And then throwing in a little bit of clarinet. And this is all working pretty nicely together with the horns and so on. Just so nicely scored in there. And this really feels like it is leading somewhere to a new section. So you're maintaining the driving staccato, right? And you are providing a good transition to a part that's workable. And this part did not feel relentless, even though you're really scoring your lower pitches with a light touch. This didn't feel relentlessly high right in here, and I felt that I think that there's so much potential here for a stronger harp part. So think about all those things. This is a little strange. When you mark pizzicato here and pizzicato there, and then you have something else, and then you say pizzicato again, you're giving the player the sense that like maybe this was supposed to be arco, right? Just mark it once. Mark it once. It lasts until you say arco, right? So this is unnecessary. This first one is great. Get rid of all the other ones. This first one is great. Get rid of all the other ones, right? I think there's a utility, a plugin or something in Sibelius anyway, that can check whether or not you have written 2 pizzicatos in a row, right? And like you can delete the ones that are superfluous, right? But in a situation like this where you're marking pizzicato and then you have another phrase after a rest and then you have pizzicato again, the player is going to think that this was supposed to be arco, and so that's what leads to raised hands at rehearsals, right? Which you want to avoid, because every raised hand at a rehearsal to answer a question costs X amount of dollars and X amount of minutes that the orchestra could have spent just rehearsing and getting things done, right? So it's like a double loss, right? Not only is the money being spent on nothing to do with performing, but it's also, you're also losing the time that the players could be spending practicing clearing up little questions. Sometimes a conductor will look through a score like this and they'll catch a little error like that and so on, and they'll, like at the beginning of the rehearsal, they'll be the people answering the questions before they're asked. They'll say, look, there's a superfluous pizzicato. That doesn't mean that there's arco before that in the cellos at bar 16. And then in piccolo, there's an unplayable note there. I talked to the composer, and he said he forgot that whole bar was supposed to be down an octave. And then as for the bass drum, there, you have an X note head that was put in there by accident. Get rid of that. And so on and so forth. So they'll just go through, everybody will be ready with their pencil to get it out of the way. Sometimes the conductor can get everything done in a minute, right? And then they just go straight into the rehearsal, and it's so exciting. One last little thing, piano for reference. You may have missed this in the guidelines, but in the future, like in the next the next challenge, which I hope you'll participate in, because wow, it would be great to see your very economic approach applied to the 2022 orchestration challenge, which will be a completely different, a score that is it's different from any other thing that we've done. There are 1 or 2 things that have a little similarity to it, but it is unique. So if you get rid of this reference score, next time you are participating in these challenges, then you actually can have a bigger staff size, right? And then it's more readable for everybody. So, yeah. So think about all those things. It's really great to get a score from you, Tim. And I think that this is way stronger than it may look or sound to people who are used to a possibly more sophisticated sound set, right? Look into getting Note Performer or some other kind of sound set, because like you really deserve it. This is just such great scoring. It's just really, really fun. I just love the economy and the, like if you're just starting out with this, that's very, very strong scoring is what I'm going to say, right? And if you are a little bit more experienced, then that would explain a few things that I'm seeing in the score. So great job, Tim. And now I'm going to take a quick break for dinner, which you're not going to notice because as far as you're concerned, I'm just going to go straight on to the next entry. That's a very cool score, Tracy. So, a couple little comments that I'm going to make kind of heading into this. And, once again, I'm sort of turning into an advertisement for Note Performer. I think Note Performer would give you just a way better sound, and it's very, very cheap and uses almost no RAM. The sound set that you're using just now, that we could hear just now, it has some very kind of honky sounding horns, and the interesting thing was how loud the horn part was. It was just very much cranked up in the mix, and I'm wondering if you made those adjustments yourself. I'm assuming in Dorico, maybe you changed the levels so that the horn part was louder, but really it's so loud that it really almost sounds like a horn concerto, right? The way that the volume is boosted for the first and second horn. And did you notice that the harp sounded a bit like a guitar part as well? So so those are just things to think about. Now, just in general, like looking at the usability of the harp part, there are a few comments that I'd like to make. First of all, the glissando would be audible in this context, except for the fact that the length of the glissando is so short, right? You're only going like even less than 2 octaves right here. So in order for a sweeping glissando to really have power, you need to cover at least like 3 octaves, if not 4 or 5, right? You've got a high note here in the piccolo that is the highest E on the piano, right? So this could easily glissando all the way up to that high E, and you could start lower. You could start on the lowest F, or you could of the bass staff, or even an octave lower than that, and just have this massive, beautiful sweep. And you could even maybe start even a little earlier too, if you wanted to. But just really covering, the more strings that you cover, the more chance that there will be for the harp to be heard in this context. Now, as to some of this other scoring, the problem is that you are just so loud, like it's forte scoring, right? And you've got horn and and you've got pizzicato playing over the same pitches as the harp, right? So both of those factors are going to steal away the sound of the harp. Now, if you were to score this harp an octave higher, if these parts were an octave higher, and if the other parts in the orchestra were scaled down, let's say that you just had a beautiful broad contrast here of just a very wide contrast between fortissimo and, say, like mezzo piano or even piano, and the harp was scored forte or mezzo forte, then you would hear the harp, right? It would be audible. And then, of course, you can throw in the crescendo at the end. Okay, so those are just some general comments. Now, let's go to the website criteria, the evaluation criteria. And the first concern that we've got here, I would say, is not a problem. Like the pitch weight being in the upper middle register of the piano is not a problem. You have a very beautiful wide range, a very wide scope, very orchestral, symphonic at times. So that's fine. But the whole issue, the second issue is thematic material repeats often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated the exact same way throughout. So you add a little bit of weight in the bass down here, double basses and tuba and so on, bassoon. But more or less, like these two parts really sound similar, right? So there are ways of sort of changing things around a little bit. Like I like this little roll to the tish on the cymbal. And look, right here you can just give us a normal note head, right? Now, if you are just scoring a quarter note, then that means that the player is going to damp the cymbals on the next beat, right? It's just going to go and then stop, right? Rather than like if you were to score a say a half note, then you'd get a much longer sustain on that, right? So you may want this to last longer. So don't limit yourself just to like the the problem with the sound set is it does not understand. Like they are not usually sound sets running off of notation applications do not understand damping. They do not understand stopping, like what a rest coming after a quarter note means, right? Generally speaking. And this has been I started doing this in the 80s, okay? I started working with notation applications in the 80s, and I remember when just specific application notation software started to incorporate sound sets or just sounds. At first, it was like General MIDI or there were it sort of grew out of applications like Mark of the Unicorn and so on, like where it was really about the whole thing was really about sequencing and composing with sequencing, what we would call a DAW today, and then trying to make the notation application part or the notation part of the application more and more sophisticated, and then you ended up with Finale, right? And then back in the day there was Encore, kind of running side by side with Score, which is what I used. So I remember this going all the way back to those days. And how many years has it been? Software developers out there. I'm 59 years old. And I have been using these applications for 36 years. How hard would it be for somebody to have a cymbal sound that cut off, that, there was a difference between clash cymbals, as you scored here, and a suspended cymbal? The difference between the dishes hitting each other and a stick hitting the dish. I mean, come on. That should have been standard 15 years ago, if not 35 years ago. Well, that's a little too early, but okay. So anyhow, that's my gripe. Sorry, I'll get off my soapbox now. But yeah, so if you want a longer sustain, if you want a longer time value, then write it in, okay? And don't use X note heads in a concert score. That's more for crossover scoring and other things. Or like a kind of a special indication, like some sort of special technique. Clash cymbal, I think you can just say cymbals, right? I think that the default will always be a cymbal pair. And if you could say cymbals and then you could just say pair right here. And that takes away any doubt. All right. So let's get back to analyzing the actual orchestration. So yeah, things are pretty much the same in both of these versions. So the question is like whether or not you can live with that, right? Down the road. Like at the first, the first impulse, Tracy, is to just get this finished and get it, into my inbox, right, for the challenge. But then thinking about it kind of in retrospect, like are you happy with that, right? With the pretty much just the same thing twice. Like, is there some way that the orchestration could magnify itself? Maybe starting a little bit, even less, just having even a less of a presence right in here, and then getting bigger the second time. That which is, of course, that second criterion. Now, as far as the orchestration of it's concerned, it's working all right. You've got that triple octave here. I think you should really. So, I guess you mean just oboe, like one oboe right here, and you just mean one clarinet, right? But I feel that these two wind instruments are not enough to balance with the horn below, and it's especially not enough to balance with the way that the horn is turned up in the mix, right? So it really, A2 horns are going to be 4 times as penetrating to the ear as a single oboe and a single flute above, in the way that you got this scored. So I would think if you've got the two flutes, put them together right here, right? If you've got, maybe your clarinet could jump down and double the oboe. I don't know. Maybe that's getting to be too much power in there, but still, it just feels a little underpowered the way that it's scored. Now, one last little problem right in here, and that is tying a grace note, right? So you have the same exact value, right? So, or excuse me, you have the same exact pitch, right? So it is, the problem is that if you look at the piano score, the way that this whole grace note works, see, we've got another B tied to B here. And another comment before I forget to mention it later is that this is really a weak note for the flute. You would get better results if both of the flutes were playing A2 above. All right, so the whole thing about it was that the B was tied to the B. Like you had a B tied grace note and then an accent on the downbeat, right? So it's because B and E were being played together by the upper part of the right hand, and then the thumb was hitting the B that followed it, right? So that's the context of it. So slurring E to B, like here, makes sense, but slurring B to B or tying B to B doesn't, because you're basically telling these two players to come in early, and they have one of the main melodic notes, right? So it just throws the orchestra off when you have a tied like a tied grace note like that, right? So really watch out about it. Really think about like what are the consequences or what are the implications, right, behind just absolutely doing a dead-on transcription where you really are using exactly the same notes in the same situations, because they don't exactly apply to this kind of massive group playing. All right, I'll get off that soapbox too now. So I would say just that is really just the biggest problem. Coming back to the horn part right in here, and you really have a massive amount of weight on that low B, right? You've got A2 horns and then some, right? Then we're throwing in this F sharp here sounding B, and then we've got the trombones A2 sounding B, right? So it is really, there's a huge amount of pressure on that B right in there. And then of course we've got the violas. Now, who's going to hear the violas, right? With this much brass sitting on that B. So if the violas are really not going to be heard, then maybe they can do something an octave higher or somewhere else in the harmonic scheme. All right, so now we're coming to this part, and there are two concerns: melodic development soaring quite high to the uppermost orchestral register, and accompaniment figures covering a wide range, possibly greater than could be covered by a wind instrument, and maintain the integrity across the scope of the instrument's range. Okay. So those were two concerns, and I've already made my comments about harp. This would work if the harp were up an octave and everybody else were much softer, right? Same thing here. But if you have, anytime you're scoring pizzicato, you have to think that how many violas will be playing this in a decent sized orchestra? 10 to 12, right? So that is 10 to 12 strings being plucked versus one string being plucked by the harp. Granted that the harp strings have a lot more solidity and a lot more sustain and everything else. But then, like, check this out. You're asking the harp player to play staccato, like a slurred staccato, right? So how does that make sense with the harp, right? You have to ask yourself that. What is the harpist going to be doing, a sort of a mezzo staccato as they play, which is kind of fussy, it is sort of possible, but it's not really in the nature of the harp. It's more in the nature, like the idiomatic thing for the harp would just be to not have staccatos on there and just have a beautiful, graceful slur, right? So to get back to the other point, just have many strings from the viola, much drier from the viola group, the much drier sounding, and they will completely overwhelm anything the harp plays with their one single string. I love the way that you bring in the cellos right in here, and that helps to give the accompaniment some weight as the orchestra comes back in. But look, if you have to stay strong here, if you feel that it is in the nature of this passage for all of these parts to stay at forte or louder, cut the harp, because you're just wasting their time. You could score it up an octave, it would still get absorbed, into all of the other things that are happening. These accented staccato fortissimo flutes, right? So I've already mentioned what I feel is a problem right in here of the second flute being asked to play lower tones. Here it's not so much of a problem because there isn't as much interfering with that, except like the horn from below, right, is going to be making things a little complex, but it's not fatal. All the same, right? Are you going to A2 right here? Here you're saying just 2, I see. Okay. I think it would be better in this kind of scoring for the first player to dovetail to the piccolo right here, and then drop down and play A2 with the flutes. And there's nothing stopping you from having 2 oboes. You could have put 2 oboes here and then had this beautiful A2, just very, very hard and pointy kind of playing right in there, or not. It's not completely necessary. I love the idea of the English horn doubling the accompaniment pattern from above. That's rather fun. Okay, so right in here, we've got this kind of scoring in there, and I'm just quickly looking over at the So I would say just so long as you're sure that this isn't going to interfere with the integrity of the line here, right? So here you had a beautiful, smooth, leaping kind of staccato. Here you're deciding to go with a more slurred kind of an approach. And what will that do? What will the horns and the first violins do to the energy of this, right? So you have to ask yourself that. Is it going to check the momentum, right? That sort of like suddenly we don't feel like we're going as fast, even though the tempo hasn't decreased. Okay, and then here you have like just one flute. So I think one flute being accompanied below by this much, right? The horns and the strings. I think you need more power, right? A2 at least on the flutes, and then and once again dovetail, right, into this part. And if you really want this to be very firm, the A2 should be back here, right? Or even earlier. All right. So I think right in here, there's really nothing stopping you from doubling as much as you like of the oboe line right in here with the first violins. In fact, I think it would make it stronger. And by the way, it's really good the way that you're being economical with your piccolo and bringing it in early. There are a ton of accents in the original piano score. I don't think it's necessary to bring in even more accents everywhere, right? I think it's just, by asking for this many accented staccatos, it just really makes the music really toink, 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 toink. Everything is toink, 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 toink. Right? And it just, after a while, the audience just shuts off, right? Like if you use any particular one articulation style that's very, very obvious all the time, it loses its specialness, right? It's kind of like having timpani everywhere, right? Like, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your timpani parts, but I'm just saying, like, some things in some of these scores, I'm seeing timpani all the way through to the end. And my concern there is that the ear will just get used to it, and by the end of the screen, it's just no longer impressed by it, right? So just be careful of how many, like staccato, no problem, but but so many accents, so much accented staccato, perhaps we'll end up with a loss of focus from the audience. All right, and now here you're giving the melody to the second, right? And I would say that's not the job of the second player. The other problem too is that you are taking the part down lower and lower and lower to a place where it is weaker and weaker, right? It just, that it already will have a big problem being heard just on these E's with a single flute against the entire first violin section. Violins have a tendency to absorb the sound of the flute, and that certainly happens when they're playing unison. And then, of course, when they're playing octaves together, the violins can just absorb the sound of the flute up an octave from them, while still having a more radiant sound. However, like right in here, I should think that an instrument that could provide a beautiful, warm background kind of a sound to your violins would really be the oboe. Or if you wanted a cooler, more direct, almost cutting sound, then I would say use the clarinet. But flute is just going to disappear, and it will be as if we're not even playing for the most part, unless the conductor sort of takes time to balance things and everything. But then why should they? Because you don't really finish the phrase, right? These are these are phrases that start on two, end on one. Dun 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 dun. What? Right? Shouldn't the phrase end on the downbeat? On an eighth note, right? But other than that, this is really rather fun right in here. But once again, the horns are so strong in the mix. Do you know what I mean? Perhaps this part could have been done by clarinets, right? And and had less, just pushed into the would push a lot less into the sound picture, or higher. Maybe I'm just thinking about how far up you would push the bassoons. That wouldn't be too high for bassoons to double. All right, and then we get to this right in here on our final concern of maintaining a driving staccato, transitioning smoothly into the next passage. I could imagine this leading somewhere, and I think it is a really great way of maintaining the driving staccato. So you just have to ask yourself, do you want it to be paced at the end? Right? Do you want pacing? Do you want this to be some unruly child running down the street with absolutely no limitations, which is how it's scored in the piano part? There's no pacing until you get to the very end by the, just right here. Where's that kid going? Grab him quick before he runs out into traffic, right? Or do you want like really pointing out the down or pointing out the main beats of every bar, right? So do you really want that kind of sound? However, having said that and exaggerated things a little bit for emphasis, I apologize. The harp does sound really beautiful here. I feel that it would probably be better to approach this with the same kind of dynamic arc that was in the score, right? So, which is a crescendo from here, and then diminuendo out, and then you end up in a place where it's kind of calm and suspenseful and possibly slightly sinister, as opposed to just pushing forward into a big strong section, which is not necessarily what the music does in the piano score. And then, of course, you could always bring down the dynamics so that the harp would work, because the way that you've scored this is, anything lower than middle C in harp gets harder and harder to hear the lower it goes against such strong scoring, right? So you could have your crescendo starting from here, but from, you could have subito piano, or you could do a diminuendo or something. And this could be playing piano with a crescendo, and then this could come in at forte. And then they could both diminuendo together. And I think the harp would stand out really beautifully. It's very cool. Like, if you want to keep the pacing in there, that's fine. I would make this staccato in your tuba. Okay, so I forgot to mention one particular concern, and that was whether or not this part was going to feel relentless if there was no textural contrast and you provided that contrast, which is nice. It's similar to what happened before, but it's not the same, right? You made some changes, so I think that's cool. So I mean, I hope you'll accept this this feedback. Just it is just intended to see what I can do to make your score more concert ready, and if you decide to pursue it further, and who knows, you could run into somebody who wants to perform this or give it a reading or whatever, right? So there's always that chance, and if you do, maybe some of my advice would be useful, or maybe it would be useful in other projects that you're working on that will have similar problems. One thing I would say is, like, unless you're doing like a commercial recording, say for film or something else, you don't need to have a bar number on every single bar. That's really more of a film score thing, or commercial music kind of a thing. Okay, so thank you so much, Tracy. It just really, if people will remember, I went off to have some dinner at the end of the last evaluation, and I just decided to get some sleep. And now you're the first evaluation for the next day, and really just a great way to wake up and to look at this score that just really has a lot of brightness to it and fun. And I think, like, with Note Performer would sound like twice as good in the mock-up. So awesome work. On to the next one. Great to have another score from you, Lev. It's just so much fun. And a lot of this is workable, you mightn't think, after hearing me harping on about the limitations of the harp. You just need more consistency in some of your dynamic scoring, okay? So I'd say right here, if you can tell everybody to play forte in your winds, you certainly can get away with forte in your strings as well. And if you also mark your timpani just simple forte in your cymbals, then there is some slight chance that the harp, this big beautiful chord, will sound like something. I would score this like this. So yeah, and then of course, just have the roll line cover everything. All right, so that way you're having left hand, right hand, left hand come over the top, or a harpist may want this note to be part of the right hand because just of the broader. The harpists actually have a much broader scope, right? They can reach in tenths easily. All right, usually. So yeah, so with these big rolls, there is kind of a chance, and I would actually, if there's any way to indicate it on the score or to tell the harpist, I would want the roll to be into the beat, right, rather than on the beat. So dun 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 bum bum. So that way you have a chance. Like there's just all of those notes have more of a chance of being heard. Now right in here, I think this is lovely. Piano. Why isn't everybody else piano? Right? Why can't everybody just shut up so you can hear the harp? Right? If you want the harp in there, that is the consequence, right? I like the fact that you've got these different subdivisions of the beat right in here. There's sort of pentuplets across a bar of 3. That's cool. Okay, but yeah, I mean they'll make things a little bit more complex, but if you really want that harp to be heard, right? And then right in here, we have piano and the brass. Why not piano with everybody else too? Why, that way you'll hear the harp. But unless you're willing to make those changes, and unless those changes feel right to you, then just leave out some of this, right? Okay, so that was my little detour about the harp. Another thing that I would sort of mention about this, it just really feels like there is a lot of symbol in this. Like you're using the symbol to emphasize everything, right? So maybe you can ease off on it a little bit. Like, maybe here on these points it's perfectly fine. And then maybe you could just throw in one here, right? And then drop the rest. All right. So let's talk about the evaluation criteria. Pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, not a concern. Thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive, well, you pretty much do the same thing twice, right? So you just have to decide whether or not you are comfortable with that. Do you feel that in the long run, if this piece is going to be played hundreds of times, thousands of times possibly, your arrangement of it, are you happy with the first 4 bars being exactly the same as bars 9 through 12, right? Is there something that you could do to possibly make the second time through feel even more expansive and help lead into this section better, right? Not that there's anything wrong with the way you've got it scored now, but I'm just saying, if you put your mind to it, are there ways that you can add some variety to this? Not so that it's completely different, but just so that it maybe expands more, maybe even contracts more. Like there have been some approaches to this that I've seen in this overall challenge where the second time around was softer than the first time, right? And it made perfect sense with their sensibilities. As to the actual orchestration here, I like the piccolo doing this. Yep, 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 yep. It's very, very cool, and I love this right in here. It's really deceptive. It almost sounds like a harp, like a downward harp glissando. The way that it comes through in the mock-up. That's very, very cool. Now here we get into a problem. If you have a specific bowing pattern, you only need to mention it once and then say simile afterwards, or SIM period. And then you don't need to mention it again. The players are smart enough to see that they should do it. Okay, but here's the problem, is that you are giving the players a staccato, right? And having altolone, right, which means just all down bows, having altolone is not just a bowing direction. It is a kind of articulation style, right? It is a zooming bow. The player is going zoom, 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 right? And the proper articulation mark for that is not staccato, but tenuto, right? But then you've got the grace note coming before it. Blah, 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 blah. I mean, does that really make sense? A zoom, a zoom, a zoom, a zoom. I mean, it sounds a little like Scooby-Doo or something like that, right? So is that the right approach to take? Or, just going back and forth. I'm thinking up, down, up, down, up. I think that might work just as well. I don't think there's anything about this. Like if you were to get rid of the grace notes entirely, then you'd have me more on your side, right? And just really have that kind of sound. Because there also has to be enough time for the violinist to bring their bow back up to that position so that they can play down bow again. And if this goes very fast, like you scored it even faster than I recommended. I recommended dotted half note equals 60. You've gone up to 62. So the player has even less time to get back into the right position and throw in the grace note, right? So you are really pushing it right there, I would say. For real real top level, top flight professionals, probably not a problem, but still, it's just still it just doesn't feel consistent to me. The staccato, the grace notes, the altolone, it just doesn't really feel right to me, right? Okay. So, but aside from that, I think it's just really it's very very fun. I wonder if there's enough weight on this little motive right in here. You know, is it enough to have? I'm assuming these are Atu oboes, and here you have just second clarinet. So okay, so why are you giving all of this to the second clarinet player? Do you have a second clarinet player friend? Like everybody assumes that Dvorak was in love with his second flute player. Okay, so like unless you have some specific reason why your first clarinet player couldn't play this, then I would say either have this A2 so that you have more weight in this little motive, or give it to the first player because that's their job. Their job is to lead their little family. Okay, so like a clarinet family can be huge. I mean, look at some Strauss and Mahler scores, right? So like you can have a clarinet family where there are 3 clarinet players, and then there's an E-flat clarinet player and a couple of bass clarinetists, right? So that first clarinet player has a lot of responsibility, and that is their job, by golly, to be the person that really states the melody. So don't give it to the second unless you have a really, really good reason, which I'm really not seeing any justification for that so far. And then the last issue is that the oboes are in they're kind of right at the top part of where their range is strong, which is great. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with it. But flute, I'm guessing this is a single flute player. Your flute player is going to be completely absorbed by the clarinet player here, right? They have, they just don't have the strength to compete against even a single clarinet player right next to their throat tones. Lower Chalumeau register. The flute player is at a disadvantage here. Once you start getting up to around D, maybe E, right? This, then it makes more sense. But the way that it's scored right in here, it's just like it should be an octave higher. It's just what it feels like to me. However, right here, I really like this. So if everybody could just shut up, right? If your lower strings could bring down their volume, and the same thing with this pizzicato in here, then you could keep the harp, right? Bass clarinet, shh, and you could keep your flute in this lower register, and it would be just a beautiful combination. Because see what you get with this by having the flute in the lower middle register, and the same thing for the piccolo, an octave higher. You get this wonderful folk flute kind of a sound, right? And then when it goes over the top, you're throwing in the oboes below, which I think is ingenious, Lev. I think that's like the strongest part of the entire score because like you get those wonderful overtones pushing at the piccolo above from the oboe. And people who have studied some of my lectures, like for instance on Holst, where I talk about the relationship of the oboe with the piccolo, just the oboe having these very acute penetrating overtones, and the piccolos just the fundamental tones of the piccolo being reinforced by them below by the octave or even 2 octaves. So that to me that works, but this other part right in here, it just feels weak to me, or just kind of inconsequential, right? Okay, now continuing on. So we're getting into this part, and then you have the flute take over again, and I really love this kind of rip going upwards. Okay, but there's just going to be some balance problems. A2 horns and yeah. So like it is good that you have your horns and trumpets and everybody playing softly, but I would just bring it down to a single player of each, right? Just really just have them like I would say just like one horn right here. I would give it to the third player. One trumpet player, one trombone player. That is enough. Or you could just have this be like just cut out the horns and give maybe Atu on the trombones, but yeah, like right here you've got four players sitting on this one single set of pitches, and that is going to be fat no matter how soft you're telling them to play. And the same thing, like three trumpets, right? Is going to have just a tendency to, I mean, forget about the harp, right? Even with this being soft, the harp has really got a hard row to hoe, and it shouldn't be mezzo forte, right? It should be fortissimo if you don't want to have any chance of the harp being heard right in this area. Okay, so yeah, because I mean, it's essentially it's just playing the same things, and the overtones, even at this soft dynamic, will just overwhelm what the harp is doing. Okay, so you just have to, yeah, I think you need to rethink this right in here. But I really love the way that you rip up to the top here. But just overall, you have to control the dynamic here. You have to bring everything down to a soft dynamic if you want the role of if you want this really key role in here of your flute to be playing in its low register, right? And then you've got the clarinet above it playing octaves with the... Yeah, I mean, I just think that there needs to be a little bit... You need to sort of think out how this is all going to work dynamically. Because, as it is, like, if you really want to preserve the role of the flute like you did in here, then everything needs to be way softer. You can't have forte clarinet right in here over the very, very weak flute right in here. And then, you're starting off, yada-da-da-da-da-dum. So this... So Atu, it's playing on top of violas and Atu horns, right? So it's really not going to gain a lot of strength until about right here. So yeah, maybe this needs to start off pianissimo, right? Pianissimo, and yeah. Well, I will leave the rest of it to you to think out, but I really love the way that everything rushes up here, and I like these 16th notes and these sextuplets. I think that all works really great, and I think it's really, really fun rushing up to this point. Okay, so here's the problem with going tish, 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 is that the phrasing here is ending on the downbeat and then beginning on the second beat for the next motives, right? It's stop. So that's the end of the first of that preceding phrase. And then the next phrase starts on the second beat, right? Dun dun dun. Da 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 dun da 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 dun da 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 dun. Right? 2 3 1. 2 and 3 and 1. 2 and 3 and 1. 2 and 3 and 1. Okay, and you've written that phrasing right into certain parts, right? But I mean, by sort of bridging between them, you take away the power of the downbeat here, right? And just by turning this into the first note of a phrase of 4 beats, I think it just sort of takes it. You are also preventing the ear from falling into the rhythm that is coming up with these other parts, right? So just think about the implications of that, right? About some of the scoring in here, right? Or just maintaining that driving, those same driving staccatos right in here. And, this right in here. And of course, once again, I protest. I don't think this is going to work. Having altalone approach with with these very severe down bows. But I still think it's really great. I love the trading off. The octave oboes with the octave first violins. And then the clarinets with the seconds, and the bassoons with going back to the first. That's all very, very fun. About the only thing that I feel is missing here is the is the I mean, you have a couple of notes of the harmony in here with your trombones, but you don't have the full harmony really. Like you're throwing in harmony here, okay, more or less based on the piano score, but then going forward, we're just kind of missing that follow through. So, I mean, here's where clarinets and bassoons and so on could trade off some of that support. Yeah. And then right in here, I think this is really lovely. Yep, up, 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 two trumpets, right? But I think in order to balance this, it's not enough. I mean, okay, so you've got the middle strings playing in octaves here on this part down here, and I just feel that like something needs to double one of these parts. Maybe bass clarinet could come in here, and you're barely using bass clarinet at all. Bass clarinet could be doubling the cello part right in here, and that would give it more stability. And look at how you're marking this fortissimo against this forte. So what chance do these players have to balance against A2 trumpets, which can basically outplay most everything else in the orchestra, right? And why do they have to start fortissimo, right? You're bringing this down. You're bringing you're descending, right? And you've got mezzo forte. See, here's something I don't understand. Mezzo forte first violins and forte bassoons. Why can't they both be mezzo forte? And why can't everybody start here with piano, doubling the cellos with the bass clarinet, and then crescendo, like it says in the piano score, crescendo to mezzo forte, and then let off, right? And then of course I can see where this is headed because you've supplied a few bars of B, so that's very helpful. So that way I think you are fulfilling the possible concern of transitioning smoothly into the next passage. That is a smooth transition. However, one thing that I would caution about is all of this slurred staccato. Once again, it's pacing, right? You're da 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 da. I mean it just like it's not a runaway child anymore. Your trumpets are the runaway children. They're running down the street. Their mother's chasing them, right? Hey, come back, don't run into traffic. But when we add the pacing, it's sort of like we're saying this is the beat of the bar here, ever, over and over again, right? So we lose that sense of kind of runaway genius. So I would just say get rid of the slurs, right? And then you can embrace the marcato nature, right? So the slurs are antithetical to the idea of molto marcato that Fauré has in his score. So, but I mean, generally speaking, like the overall vision of what you've got here is very strong, Lev. And I know I'm just picking apart everything here, but it's just because you deserve a good evaluation, a good, strong evaluation, I emailed a lot of people back thanking them for their entries and saying, I look forward to giving this a strong evaluation or, a solid evaluation. That's what I mean. I should look it over and I should give you the best of what I can give you in terms of possibly getting it ready for the stands at a rehearsal or a reading or even a concert. All right. So those are my thoughts about this. I think it's a really awesome score, Lev, and of course it's just so different from everybody else, and everybody else is pretty much different from everybody else. It's not like I'm saying the same things too often in the same exact context. Even when I do say the same things, the context always changes because everybody's, everybody, or not everybody, but many people might be making the same, the same thing that needs to be looked at. That's that same approach, but in a different way, right? Like I love these rolls, for instance. And there's no reason why these rolls have to only last one beat. They should last they should last a dotted half note, right? They should fill the bar. So anyhow, some beautiful ideas here. I hope you can get them to work, if you can make them work, or just apply what I've said to one of your own compositions, which I'm sure will sound great. So think about all that stuff, and now on to the very last evaluation in this really lovely group of entries. I love it, George. That's just amazing. It's so fun, and it's a great way to bring this group of evaluations in this particular category, this particular collection, to an end. Really great little capstone on, or great big capstone on everybody's efforts up to this point. Just so fun. Okay, so I can't remember if it was you or somebody else who was saying, "Oh boy, I'm going to get in trouble for my harp writing. I've been looking at all the other ones." So look, I'm just not even going to get into it. All right, like I think that you realize that the harp cannot really contribute very much, if anything, and we can hear in the mock-up that it's just not, it's just not coming through. So don't worry about it. I would say back to the drawing board. If you want to throw in a few glissandos, then great. If you want to bring down the volume of one of these passages, right? You're saying mezzo forte here. If you want to bring down the volume overall, and you'll give your harp a little bit more space. But other than that, let's not even worry about it. Okay. So let's get back to the pet peeves of other pet peeves. Sorry, I'm not laughing at you. I'm laughing at my own, my own tendency to get stuck in these things. All right. So yeah. So if, as you've been hearing with a few recent entries, I'm dubious about grace notes and accented staccato and altalone down bows. Okay. But here you did the simile right. That's fine. So I think if you want like that driving, if you want that driving sound, right? Just then get rid of the grace notes. Just have other people play them, right? Have other, the grace notes can start seeing other people now, right? And if you just really want that shoving kind of sound from your strings, then that's fine. Just get rid of the grace notes, get rid of the accented staccato, and throw in tenuto, and then you are in like Flynn, right? Everything's fine. Okay. And like right here, once again, just like you have the right idea. This is all doable. I love your triple stops right in here. That's fine. Little weird, but all playable in a couple of places. So, same thing. Just get rid of your accented staccato, throw in tenuto marks, and that just makes a lot more sense. It's not like it's not playable. It's just it's just weird. You know what I mean? It's like a yeah. I mean, it's doable, but it's just the combination of everything. I think the grace notes, and I mean, it just yeah, easy fix, very easy fix. Okay, so let's apply those evaluation criteria. Okay. And starting off, pitch weight in the upper middle register of the piano, that is not a problem. You have this beautiful, massive scope to the orchestra, and if I may say so, just really admirable. Like the kind of aspirational quality in here. Just just it's bursting. Like the arrangement is just bursting out of the seams, and I love that energy. Okay. Then you've got the concern about thematic material repeating often, possibly sounding repetitive if orchestrated exactly the same way twice. Well, okay. So maybe that is possibly a problem if you think that that's a problem, right? So, like, it's, getting this ready in order to send to me on time. Okay, that's all fine, right? And orchestrating the first two bars in a way that they can be repeated satisfyingly in the course of a mock-up and for this evaluation challenge, then that's also fine. But what about immortality, right? Like, what if this orchestration was going to be played hundreds of times, thousands of times possibly, in the standard repertoire now? So would you be happy with the way that the first four bars is exactly the same as bars 9 through 12, right? Is there something that you would want to do to maybe make the orchestration overall progress, right, to a bigger and bolder and beefier kind of a sound? Or would you want to just pull the rug out from under the listener and suddenly have like almost like an echo, right? Is there anything that you could do for some variance between these two parts? So that is just a question every orchestrator has to answer, but it may be one that they haven't asked themselves yet, right? Which is why it's in my list of criteria. So just looking at the way that this is scored, though, it's it's pretty intriguing. I like the way that you're respecting the role of the second and the third as, being the lower middle and upper middle voices interlocking. I think that is nice, and then pairing up the third and fourth, first and second in ways that are very logical for them, right? And then the second and fourth and first and third in ways that make sense. So that's just really nicely done. Okay, good horn scoring, just like in the approach. And I love you going up to this screaming B here. Like, it's very, very possible. And then this nice fat G and so on. I'll have some more to say about whether or not this works, though, right? Because there is something you need to think about right in here. Okay. And I love the scoring in here is very, very cool. Plus 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 0, right? Or stop 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 open. So yeah, that all works really nicely too. Okay, you have these barking trombones down here, barking mad, woof 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 woof. Right? I would say if you're going to, I mean, it's logical, like the way that this is all scored. The trombones are basically just playing together in at the same time. But if you're, it's almost better to, if you can only have two staves, it's better to pair up the bass trombone with the tuba, even if that leads to kind of strange looking voices, right? Lots of split voices and so on, doing different things at different times. It just would be better, right? But anyways, it's fine for this challenge. But I would just say in general, try to throw in bass trombone on its own staff. Okay, just like you have third trumpet on its own staff. This is kind of cool. The muted and unmuted trumpets. It's all very, very fun. Yeah, and then that's just the roll in here. Well, I'll talk about these in a minute, but okay. And yeah, just like throwing sleigh bell in there and tam tam, that's so fun. And bass drum with hard sticks, right? Okay. I don't know if you need an accent mark on that. It's kind of like, the hard sticks are kind of like an accent already, right? All you need to do is mark forte there. Okay. Yeah, so like about the only fly in the ointment, right? So I'm gonna talk about some ranges, some things for you to think about. Okay, so about the only fly in the ointment, I would say, is that your violins are all playing, like you've got 30 players, right? Say 16 firsts and 14 seconds, are all playing this B. And, they are taking up a very important part of the sound picture, but it's also being doubled by your first horn, right? So, do you need that much weight from your strings on there? Why can't the first violins be doubling what's going on in the oboes, right? And just like sort of spreading the sound of the strings across more. You'd have a kind of a silkier sound to this, and it maybe not so forcefully bright. Of course, maybe forceful brightness is what you want here. I don't know. Now the other the other potential problem is not really a problem in these bars. What is the possible problem is using up the sense of surprise going forwards. And that leads us to the next two criteria, which are melodic development soaring quite high to the uppermost orchestral register, accompaniment figures covering a wide range of pitches and registers, right? So let's talk about all that. The thing about it is, something I'm seeing in some of these entries is that the piccolo's playing high B, and then it's just really, it has that beautiful silvery sound up there, and very powerful. But does it take away our sense of wonder and seeing this curve going up all the way to a high D? Right? Does it take away our sense of wonder to be having the piccolo play all the way up to G here, and then suddenly going back here, and then running all the way up to E in this just wonderful triumphant gesture? Well, the power of that gesture possibly is being blunted by the piccolo and flute in this case, like playing as high as possible, right? So I'm not saying that you have to drop anything. It's really, it's just really, really intense playing, sending up the flutes up to that C every single time. Like a few bars is cool, but 8 bars of it, right? And then here you're going all the way up to an unplayable E. So some people feel, well, maybe they can play that E. Maybe I should write it in there. Maybe it would be this beautiful, brilliant sound that maybe it is slightly painful for the flute player, but dang it, can't they play it? Let's put it in. The thing about it is that, I've worked with flute players and had them play very, very high notes, like with some fingerings that they could sort of figure out. And the thing is that the whole mechanism of the embouchure and the overtones and everything else starts to close in, right? So, like, for instance, I've written high Ds in one of my pieces for the piccolo player, but after working with that player and hearing that they were this kind of almost choked, swallowed sort of whistle, and it was in the context of bird songs, right? And it was perfect for that bird song, but it did not sound louder or beautifully shrieking or anything else, right? So, and the same thing will be true of this high E, I feel. Of course, there are some specialists maybe who've worked out certain fingerings and certain ways of adjusting their embouchure so that they can really get this big, beautiful, shrieking kind of whistle. But I would say that if you really are going to have this much going on and you are going to stick to this and, damn it, I'm just going to ignore what Thomas is saying and everything else, then, I would say that's fine. But you would be better off having 2 piccolo parts and 1 normal flute part, right? If you just really have to have doubling on this high E, if you have to have so much going on up here in this very, very high register, altissimo register for your flutes, it would just be better to, have some mercy. So, like, my recommendation here is to have this down an octave, right? Then I think that this will flow really beautifully. All of this, and the same thing here. You can have, right? Right? And then the E is a surprise, and it's powerful, right? In the imagination and the perception of the listener, you're leading to something bigger than they have heard before, right? Okay, so that's that's possibly just my aesthetics, and it does not have to have anything to do with your decisions. But it's just kind of the way that I sort of perceive it from my perspective as as an orchestrator. Is the sense of proportion, right? This proportion does not have to be so much about aesthetics. It can be more of kind of a colder calculation, right? Of just like thinking, okay, well, expectation X, effect Y, right? Amount of time Z. You can tell that I've been living in the Commonwealth here, as an American saying Z. So, all right, so now, looking at the way that all of the other melodic figures intertwine underneath, including these wild trumpets and this intense trill here is so fun. I would actually consult with a trumpet player about trilling on a high B and then ending on a C sharp, right? That would be a sort of a specialized thing. I think that the trilling on the B is possible. Not the most comfortable thing to do. Perhaps the trumpet player would want to do a lip trill or something. But then ending on the C sharp, right? Just doing the little scoop and everything. I just think that that's something you need to talk to a trumpet player about. Maybe there's some trumpet players who want to add some comments. I'm not saying that's where my expertise ends, but it's just like it's something I feel I wouldn't score for some of my own experience, based on some of my own experience. But there may be some other players out there who feel it's perfectly fine, right? And these are, after all, B-flat trumpets, not C trumpets. But I mean, yeah, I almost feel like it would be easier on a C trumpet, but then like, you can't tell for trumpet players. They have their own ideas of what's easy and what's hard and which instrument they want to use, and for some of them they interchange between C and B flat, and they just have absolutely no problem with either. It just depends on like the fingering that they want to use and so on, and just what they're used to. And there are whole cultures of C or B flat players in different orchestras, right? If the first player likes their B flat, then that's what everybody plays, right? So that they have like a very unified sound. All right, I'll shut up about it now. But just any trumpet player who wants to jump in on this, leave your rant below. So yeah, so I feel that in the scope of that. That it's very, very cool. I think it's very, very fun. Of course, you're not gonna really hear the E flat clarinet all that strongly, but it is a nice pairing up, right? If the higher the trumpet player gets, the less you're gonna hear the E flat clarinet. But I mean, like then jumping over the top here, and I don't know. I mean, it's just fun, It's just a fun part. Now, looking at the going on, I would say just like. Same comments as before. I've already sort of made them about the piccolo being very high all the way through. But I feel like the way that the melody is scored right in here, except for this high E, just jump down from the A to A2 right here for your flutes, I would say. And there will be no diminishment, like especially with the huge overtones coming from the horns below. The overtones from the horns and everybody else will do the job of filling in the notion that one of your flute players was able to actually run all the way up to high E here. All right, just make the inference do the work rather than you're absolutely realizing everything. And you also you've got glockenspiel in here too, right? So yeah, so I mean you're covered. You don't need flute 1 to go all the way up to E. All right, so that is the other concern for these two sections is how to realize the accompaniment figures. And before I get into that, I just want to say that I really love the pizzicato, like the big, insanely huge triple stops. I think they're all pretty workable. I'm just kind of sort of picking through my brain. Yeah, that's all good. Yeah, some of them might be just a little fussy. Maybe not the at high speed, not the most absolutely perfect spot on intonation, but still all workable. And of course, in the face of so much other stuff going on, it's not the hugest, not the most enormously important part. Okay, but yeah, okay. So you picked clarinets to realize the accompaniment pattern, and yeah, at both times, that's the kind of the main instrument playing it. And then you've got your first violins with this lovely little squeaky touch five thing happening right in here. I almost feel like, if you're going to go there, you need a little support, like maybe like chuck in like a glockenspiel note or something like that. Would be kind of fun just to have, ting. I don't know how big a fan I am of throwing in these very solid, slightly indigestible long notes on the horns, right? It's like you got this beautiful leaping momentum right in here, and it's just jumping around, and you could have even added a little bit more in terms of the syncopation from some other instruments, I think. But you're throwing in the trombones, and you got your syncopated pizzicato and so on, and these triple stops and so on. So pretty much the work is being done, but just the issue is like, does this just slow things down, or just like make it feel like it is not dancing as much, right? But I do like this sort of. I think the syncopation right in here is really really fun though. This that's so fun. Okay. And it's like this I feel is a lot stronger, like the horn coming in on the second beat, right? And did you notice that, like, even though you've marked this down to mezzo forte, the horn is just damn loud, right? It just cuts right through because it is playing longer tones. So that's the other thing that you have to think about. Well, maybe this isn't the right instrument to do that with, right? To do these kind of longer, persistent tones. And then, of course, like this screaming high G, it just takes over everything right in here, right? Maybe that's not the right instrument to do that with. So I'm not going to make any suggestions about what would be the right instrument or instruments. But yeah, just think about the sort of penetrating powers of those instruments, playing long notes against everybody else's rushing around and leaping and dancing. Sort of almost sounds like a klaxon at times, right? It's just really kind of pushing in there. Okay, so that takes us to the next part, upper middle register continuing on in the piano score, relentless if no textural contrast. You take care of that beautifully, right? It's just, obviously you change things around and you do lots of different things, and it's very, very cool. Okay, but I've got some. I feel very positive about a lot of what's going on here, and I've already commented a little bit on like the having altalone here and so on. However, I feel that this is incredibly underpowered. This first yet da da dun, and then like in these other places you're supporting it like bump. This is sort of the equivalent of going yum bum 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 on these pitches, right? It sort of takes over for them. And then in here, dun 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 dun, right? We've got the da 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 dun. We've got the power of three groups within the string section against softening brass. I feel that the horns need to soften quite a bit by the time they get to here. Okay, so this is just really weak, right? And you can hear it in the mock-up, right? Like it's da da da, bum. Da 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 da. Just like it, just really like there's almost nothing there. So if I could just point out, you have a couple of low horns there doing absolutely nothing, right? Except for kind of looking ahead to the next thing, right? And look, they're actually, they're bringing this kind of to a close here, right? On these G's. So like, why couldn't you just have the horns double this, right? The low horns double this. Or like, look, you got your clarinets doing nothing, right? Could they be, you could even throw in some tuba in there just to be funny, right? Zong, 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 boop, 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 boop. And then cellos doubled by the horns, bah, da, da. And then all the strings together, yeah, da, 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 da. Do you see what I mean? So like, I just think, help me, I'm out here on the edge of the sound picture, right? Throw in something that makes it, that gives us some thematic continuity, because I feel that it's really suffering right in here. All right. And then, like, I'll have one last thing to say about the double basses. Okay. But let's go ahead to this really wild ending part with the temple block tremolo. That's so, so cool. Yeah, and then, like, you completely reverse the dynamic curve right in here, right? Which is supposed to be crescendo, molto marcato, right? And we've got, like, absolutely no dynamic markings here. So I'm assuming, like, so if that is true, like, if everybody else is changing, you need to tell your string player sempre whatever, right? I guess you just fortissimo, right? So I would just say fortissimo sempre at the beginning of each of these entrances, and here too. And then that way they will just continue. They will maintain that, that really, really intense staccato, and even maybe fortissimo marcato sempre, or fortissimo sempre marcato, right? And then, like, the the horns can die away, horns and tuba, really beautiful combination here, can die away behind them and then come back, right? And this bum 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 bum. Yeah. So it can, so I would say that would be one way to do it. But I mean, it really has to be molto marcato here. Just right. And we're seeing where you would take it further, right? And you justify that, and that's nice. Okay, so I'm never going to tell somebody, do not send me any entry with more bars than I am giving for your level, or for the website evaluation limit or whatever. If you want to throw in a couple more bars to show me how you are going to go forwards, that's fine. And it's very constructive in this point because of the specific criteria, of both maintaining the driving staccato and transitioning smoothly to the next passage, and you justify that really nicely. Right. But wow, that temple block tremolo, that's that's so fun. Like, unfortunately, there's like one temple block mallet sound, right? So, if you had done this, say, with soft, like maybe soft rubber mallets, that would have been even more of a brain twist, right? Rather than kind of the harder mallets, which are the default sound, or medium hard. Yeah, so wow, what a fun score. And what a fun group of scores in general. This really is giving me the energy that I need to continue on through another 18 of these scores. There are 3 more collections to come. So, another 6 hours or so, just specifically for this particular group of website entries, the 94 entries. Actually, it's 16 more scores. It's one more group of 6, and then 2 more groups of 5. And then I think at this point in evaluating my Patreon entries, I've got another maybe dozen and a half to go as well with them. So it's just really energizing. Just makes me feel so great about all of the people out there who have a passion for what I care about, which is orchestration, is like my whole life. And I really appreciate just how much you all love it too, and that's wonderful. So thank you so much for sending me such strong, thought-provoking entries that really got me going, and I feel is bringing out the best in me throughout this entire journey, looking over the website and the Patreon evaluations. And of course, thanks to the Patreon supporters who are making this possible. For people who are not yet able to support on Patreon, or is just not how they're engaging in the community, which is totally fine. This is I do not judge, value of people depending on whether or not they support me. That is, I will leave that to other people on YouTube. So thanks everybody. You're great. I love you all. Just keep up those comments. Keep up the engagement. It's really making it worthwhile for me and making me look ahead to the 2022 orchestration challenge with a lot of anticipation. See you all very soon.